The heart monitor beeped 43 times before Daniel Mercer finally broke down. He had counted. Standing in that sterile hallway, back pressed against the cold white wall, shoes still muddy from the cemetery where he'd buried his mother 6 days ago. He counted every single beep, because counting was the only thing keeping him from falling apart completely. 43 beeps. And then the doctor walked out of room 114 with that expression. The one every person learns to dread, and Daniel's world split open for the second time in less than 2 weeks. Daniel Mercer was 41 years old, a high school history teacher from Millbrook, Ohio, the kind of man who remembered every student's birthday, who stayed late to help kids who were struggling, who drove 40 minutes each way to work, because the town he taught in needed good teachers more than he needed convenience. He was not a remarkable man by the world's standards. He drove a 2009 Toyota Corolla with a cracked dashboard. He owned exactly 2 suits, one for job interviews, one for funerals, and in the past 3 weeks, he had worn the funeral one twice. First for his mother, Eleanor Mercer, 73 years old, who had passed quietly in her sleep after a long battle with congestive heart failure. And now he was standing outside room 114 at St. Augustine Medical Center, preparing to wear it for himself. 2 weeks ago, during a routine checkup prompted by exhaustion he'd been ignoring for months, a scan had revealed a mass near his liver. The radiologist had used careful words, cautious words. But Daniel had spent enough years in classrooms to know when someone was dancing around the truth. He'd requested a second opinion, then a third. All 3 had come back with variations of the same devastating conclusion. Stage 3 hepatocellular carcinoma, liver cancer. The treatment plan required immediate surgery followed by aggressive chemotherapy. The surgery alone, a partial hepatectomy, would cost somewhere between $80,000 and $110,000. Daniel's school district insurance covered 60% of in-network procedures. He had calculated the gap on a yellow legal pad the night before. The number he'd circled 3 times, hard enough to tear the paper slightly, was $44,000. He did not have $44,000. He had $612 in checking. His mother's funeral had cost $9,000, most of it on credit. He had no siblings. His ex-wife had remarried and moved to Portland 8 years ago. The closest thing he had to family was a retired colleague named Margaret who brought him casseroles and left them at his door, without knocking, because she understood that sometimes people needed to be fed without being seen. So Daniel had done what he always did when overwhelmed. He made a plan. He would meet with the hospital's financial counselor at 9 in the morning. He would ask about payment plans, charity care, anything. He had already spent 4 nights researching every medical grant, every non-profit fund, every pharmaceutical assistance program he could find. He had printed 37 pages and organized them in a manila folder. The folder was tucked under his arm when he walked into St. Augustine Medical Center on a gray Tuesday morning in November. He got off the elevator on the 4th floor. He was looking for room 411. He found room 114 instead. The door was slightly ajar. Daniel stopped, looked at the room number, looked down at his paper, and realized with a tired sigh that he'd gotten off on the wrong floor. He was turning to leave when he heard a sound that stopped him cold. Not a cry, not a scream, a laugh. A small, exhausted, broken laugh, the kind that comes from someone who has been crying so long that laughter and weeping have stopped being different things. And then a voice, low and rough, a man's voice speaking to someone unseen. I told her she has the worst timing in the world. She's supposed to be in Paris right now. Can you imagine missing Paris for this? Another voice, softer, a woman's, probably a nurse, responded quietly. She loves you. That's what family does. She doesn't know yet. A long pause. She thinks I'm here for the hernia. I haven't told her about the rest. Daniel should have walked away. He knew that. Privacy was something he respected instinctively. But his hand had stopped on the doorframe, and his feet had stopped listening to reason, because what he'd just heard was so precisely the mirror of his own situation, the hiding, the protecting, the carrying of an unbearable weight alone. that for one disorienting moment, he thought he might be eavesdropping on his own life. He knocked gently on the open door. "Sorry," he said, leaning in just enough to be visible. "Wrong room. I didn't mean to interrupt." The man in the bed was perhaps 65, with a wide face that had probably been handsome once and was still kind. He had the look of someone who had worked outdoors for many years, sun-creased skin, thick hands resting on the blanket, broad shoulders now diminished by illness. His name, Daniel would later learn, was Roy Callahan, retired firefighter, 31 years with the Columbus Fire Department. Roy looked at Daniel for a moment. Then he smiled. "You look like you need to sit down," Roy said. "More than I do, and I'm the one with the IV." Daniel laughed despite himself. It was the first time he had laughed in 11 days. He apologized again. He explained about the wrong floor. He was about to leave when Roy gestured to the chair beside the bed with the casual authority of a man who had spent decades making fast decisions about who to trust. "Sit for a minute. I've been talking to the ceiling for 2 hours, and it's terrible company." The nurse, her badge read Patricia, RN, gave Daniel a gentle, assessing look, then left them with the quiet efficiency of someone who understood when her absence was more useful than her presence. Daniel sat. They talked for 11 minutes. He knew because he watched the clock, aware he had an appointment, telling himself every 2 minutes that he was about to leave. But Roy had a way of asking questions that felt less like interrogation and more like genuine curiosity, the rare kind that actually waits for the answer. By the 7th minute, Daniel had told him about the cancer. He wasn't sure how it happened. He hadn't planned to tell anyone except the financial counselor. But Roy had said simply, "What are you carrying?" Not as a metaphor, but as a direct question. The way an older man sometimes cuts through everything. And the answer had come out before. Daniel's defenses caught up. Roy listened without interrupting. When Daniel finished, Roy was quiet for a moment. "What's the gap?" Roy asked. "Excuse me?" "The money gap. What do you need that you don't have?" Daniel hesitated. 44,000, give or take." Roy nodded slowly. He didn't wince. He didn't offer empty sympathy. He looked at the ceiling for a moment, then back at Daniel. "I know someone," Roy said, "head of the charity care committee here. Served on the hospital board for 6 years before he retired. His name is Gerald Park. Good man. Tell him Roy Callahan sent you, and tell him the whole truth. Everything you told me. Don't minimize it. People like Gerald can only help you as much as you let them see." He reached for the notepad on his bedside table, wrote a number with hands that trembled slightly, and handed it to Daniel. "Call him this afternoon, before 5. Daniel stared at the paper. "Why are you doing this? You don't know me." Roy settled back against his pillow. His face was tired but steady. 31 years ago, I pulled a man out of a burning building on Clement Street. I didn't know him either. He was just a man who needed help, and I was the one standing there. He paused. "You don't have to know someone to recognize they need a hand." Daniel called Gerald Park at 2:17 that afternoon, after his meeting with the financial counselor, which had gone precisely as grimly as expected. He told Gerald everything. He took Roy's advice and did not minimize. He talked about his mother's funeral and the credit card debt and the legal pad with the circled number. He talked about his students, because Gerald had asked what he did for work, and Daniel had answered honestly. And once he started talking about his students, 17-year-old Marcus, who had finally started reading for the first time, and a girl named Sophia, who had written a paper about the civil rights movement that had made Daniel cry at his desk. He couldn't stop. Gerald Park listened for 22 minutes. Then he said, "Come in Thursday morning at 8. Bring your documentation, all of it." What followed was not a miracle. Let that be absolutely clear. What followed was a long, grueling, terrifying process that Daniel would later describe as simultaneously the hardest and most human experience of his life. Gerald Park guided him through an application for the hospital's charity, Care Program, which, after review of Daniel's income, assets, and documented hardship, covered 60% of the remaining balance after insurance, a total of $26,000 in forgiven debt. Gerald also connected Daniel with the Ohio Cancer Assistance Fund, a non-profit Daniel had found in his 37 pages of research, but hadn't known how to navigate. With Gerald's guidance and a letter of support from his oncologist, Daniel received a supplemental grant of $9,000 toward treatment costs. The remaining $9,000, he found a way. He applied for a medical hardship personal loan. His school district's union had an emergency assistance fund he hadn't known existed. Two of his colleagues, without being asked, organized a quiet fundraiser through a local community Facebook group. They didn't tell Daniel until after. He found out when his principal, a no-nonsense woman named Diane who never cried at school, showed up at his door with a check for $4,000 and eyes that were unmistakably red. The surgery happened on December 14th. It lasted 7 hours and 40 minutes. The surgical team at St. Augustine was led by Dr. Anisha Patel, a woman who had the calm, precise energy of someone who had made peace long ago with the weight of her responsibility. Before they took Daniel back to the OR, she leaned down slightly, she was shorter than him, and said, "I've reviewed everything. You're a good candidate. We're going to do good work today." Not a promise, not a guarantee, just a clear-eyed statement of intent. It was exactly what Daniel needed to hear. He woke up in the ICU at 9:48 p.m. to the sound of heart monitors. He counted the beeps. Old habit. Nurse Patricia, the same nurse from Roy's room, he realized slowly, was checking his IV line when he opened his eyes. She looked up and smiled with the particular warmth of someone who has been hoping for exactly this moment. "There you are," she said simply. "Did it work?" he managed. His voice was barely recognizable. "Dr. Patel will come speak with you in the morning." "But yes," she said. They got clean margins. "That's a very good sign." Daniel turned his head toward the window. It was dark outside. Snow was falling. He cried for the first time since he'd gotten his diagnosis, not from fear, not from grief, but from something he hadn't felt in so long he almost didn't recognize it. Relief. 3 days later, strong enough to walk slowly, Daniel made his way down the hall to the 4th floor. Room 414, Roy Callahan. He'd asked Patricia. She'd smiled and given him the room number. Roy was sitting up in bed, arguing pleasantly with a younger woman, mid-30s, dark-haired, undeniably his daughter, about Weather Hospital. Jell-O counted as a real food group. He looked somehow both sicker and more alive than the last time Daniel had seen him. He saw Daniel in the doorway and his face opened up. "The teacher," he said. "You made it." "I made it," Daniel said. Roy's daughter looked between them, understanding without explanation that something real had happened between these two strangers in a hospital room. She slipped out quietly to get coffee, the way perceptive people do. Daniel pulled up the chair. "The surgery went well," he said. "And Gerald Park, he changed everything. The financial piece, I can manage it now." "Because of you!" Roy waved a hand with the dismissiveness of a man who gives help the way. Other people breathe, as a matter of instinct, not calculation. "How are you feeling?" Roy asked. "Like someone performed major surgery on me," Daniel said. "But also like—" He stopped, searched for words he rarely used. "Like the world is a better place than I thought it was." 3 weeks ago, Roy nodded. He looked out the window at the grey November sky. "It mostly is," he said. "People are mostly good. They just need a reason to show it. And sometimes they need someone to open the door first." He glanced at Daniel sideways. "Next time you get off on the wrong floor, go ahead and knock. You never know what's on the other side." Roy Callahan was discharged 11 days later. His prognosis, Daniel eventually learned through Patricia, who stretched hospital privacy rules exactly as far as human compassion sometimes requires, was cautiously hopeful. Roy's daughter did make it to Paris eventually. 6 months later, Roy went with her. Daniel completed 6 rounds of chemotherapy. He lost 18 pounds and most of his hair. He went back to teaching in April, thinner and slower and unmistakably changed. On his first day back, his students had decorated his classroom. Marcus, the boy who'd struggled to read, had written a card in his still imperfect handwriting that said only, "We needed you back." Daniel kept it in his desk drawer. He still drives the 2009 Corolla with the cracked dashboard. He still wears the same 2 suits. But when he passes someone in a hospital hallway now, someone with muddy shoes and a manila folder and the look of a person carrying more than they should have to carry alone, he stops. He asks the question Roy taught him, "What are you carrying?" And he waits for the answer. The moral of this story is not that kindness solves everything. It is that kindness opens doors that fear keeps closed. It is that a single genuine act, a phone number written on a notepad, a chair offered to a stranger, a question asked without agenda, can change the entire architecture of someone's life. We do not always get to know the end of the stories we step into, but that has never been a reason not to step in. If this story moved you, please consider subscribing to Soul of Kindness, a channel dedicated to stories that remind us of the best of what human beings can be. Every story we share is a reminder that in hospitals, in hallways, in the hardest moments of our lives, kindness is still the most powerful medicine there is. Now we want to hear from you. Have you ever experienced an unexpected act of kindness from a complete stranger, in a hospital or anywhere else, that changed your life or restored your faith in people? Share your story in the comments. You might be someone else's reason to keep going.